being a matter of ideology, but being a matter of personality. I wondered, and it does seem to me that a lot of the coverage is sort of fixated on Erdogan, the person of Erdogan. I wondered, do you think that if Erdogan were for some reason to disappear, that there is someone within the AKP, or whether the AKP generally would continue on the path that he's set now, or would it remake itself in some way? Would it change its direction? I know a lot of people talk about Abdullah as someone who would be a kinder, gentler face of the AKP. But do you think the problem is at the AKP level, or is it purely one man?
Well, it's an excellent question. I'm going to pass it to Ihsan. He's really the expert. Of course, the name that comes to mind, you mentioned it, Abdullah Gül, the current president, is widely admired, a very different style than Erdogan. He did, to his credit, speak out during the Gezi Park protests, but as Ihsan has written about very clearly, he's been disappointing in recent months for his going along with legislation to greatly constrict freedom of expression, including internet access, and basically not being the courageous leader we'd hoped he'd be. Now, whether he would come out and reveal himself to have just been waiting for his opportunity is another question, but I think it's better if Ihsan sort of carries on the answer.
Thank you. It's a difficult question. We can never know, but as far as I could see, the party has been formed by Erdogan, and it's Erdogan's own personal property. So nobody can challenge him in his party. Even President Abdullah Gül couldn't challenge him, not because he agrees with everything he says, but he couldn't challenge him, because if he objects to Erdogan, he will be seen as a traitor, because this word traitor is a very useful concept in Turkish politics, and it's a very instrumental concept, analytical concept to understand Turkish politics. And Erdogan actually has changed his voter base into a kind of religious community, but this is not a kind of Islamic religious community. Islamic language has been used, but it is something else. It's a new civil religion that is composed around the persona of Erdogan. So they call him like a prophet, caliph. Caliph is a very, caliph, calling him a caliph is not enough to show him a big person. So sometimes they say he has attributes of God, and touching him is a worship, and so on. So according to a recent poll by Cihan News Agency, for instance, 15% of Turkish society believe that Gülen movement volunteers are assassins, because he has been saying this on TVs every day for the last 3 months. And if you remember what Hitler's propaganda minister Goebbels said, if you repeat the same lie every day consistently and constantly, people would start believing 15%. So that's how he has been successfully convinced people that corruption did not take place. Americans and the European Union were behind these attacks. Why? Because they were jealous of the foreign policy of Erdogan, because he's the leader of the Muslim world. I mean, look at Turkey in Egypt, look at Turkey in Syria, but despite all these facts, he could present his case, unfortunately, and he could convince 43–44% of the people. We know that at least half of the deputies of the AKP do not agree with him, but they cannot challenge him. So actually this is a matter of personality, and he is similar to Tony Blair. Tony is cronies, if you remember, in his third term, and Margaret Thatcher's third and fourth term. He doesn't even speak to his ministers, and sometimes ministers hear new legislation about their own ministries from the advisors of the Erdogan. So he's now surrounded by spin doctors and so on. So and unfortunately it is related to Turkish culture. I'm not blaming Erdogan. So it is like Russia, these people, why? Because they are the inheritors of these huge empires with disintegration histories and so on. So they feel that they need strong, very powerful, charismatic, even authoritarian leaders that would keep their society intact against disintegration, division, and against these international dark forces.
I think
Sorry.
A good, solid answer to that question. In the middle here.
Thank you very much, Greg Barton. You said that you were playing the second fiddle today, but I thought you were the first fiddle because you were the presenter with actual facts and and economic figures and all that sort of thing. On the other hand, I was very much disappointed with Ihsan Yilmaz's presentation, which I thought was full of prejudice and
Do you have a question?
full of distortions.
Do you have a
No,
question, please?
no, I don't have a question.
Please sit down then.
Okay.
Thank you. Question? Yes.
Ihsan, can you give us a more convincing explanation, the two factors that you pointed out? One is related to personality, and the other one was ideological changes, which is of more recent development, like in 1 or 2 years. But my supposition is that, you know, ideologies do not change over a weekend. So can you give us sort of more political explanation? Even the idea of charisma also has political context, social base. So probably many more people would like to hear about those factors.
I fully agree with you. Ideology did not change over the weekend. That's why when he said in 2001 that he changed his ideology, obviously he did not change his ideology. So it's been there hidden underground, and when the military generals have gone, simply from the background, simply it came forward. So last year, for instance, on a live TV show, Burhan Kuzu, who is a constitutional law professor, but who is also the chair of the constitutional committee at the parliament. So he's a very influential figure in AKP. He's an AKP deputy. So he threw the EU annual progress report to the dustbin or garbage on the TV show. They said this is rubbish. In the past 10 years, they always said that they would respect it, they would obey it, they would try to implement it. So I don't have to convince you here that what happened and why they changed. What I know is that they changed. So for the last 10 years, previous 10 years, they had been saying that they would join the EU. Now they say that they would join European Union. And for the last 2 years, they always talk about American conspiracy, European conspiracy, and so on. In the past, they were saying that they would join EU, they are in favor of human rights, and so on. In the past, they were using internet freedoms. So all these internet guys, including me, in our columns and so on, we were fighting against the military generals and saying that freedoms are important, pluralism are important, you cannot ban internet and so on. And now it's Erdogan who has been banning these things. These are all concrete evidence. I mean, I don't know where we have distortion here. So I'm talking about what happened, what they said. So these are not distortions.
Thank you. Question? Yes.
Can I ask both speakers about the judiciary and without knowing a lot about the current situation with the Turkish judiciary? Professor, you mentioned the appointments that are being made, I think, on the sole decision-making basis of the current Prime Minister. Is there currently a change in the independence of the judiciary? Are they acting more independently, less independently? What is happening in the modern current era with the judiciary? Thanks.
Okay, what happened is that after the December 17 corruption investigation, Erdogan simply stopped the investigation. He asked police officers who also work for legal enforcement officers under the order of the prosecutors. His interim minister directly asked them not to obey the prosecutors, not to detain these suspects. And then with the help of the President Gül, they changed the composition of the Supreme Council of Judges and Prosecutors. And after this change, 400 prosecutors were removed from their jobs. And 10,000 police officers were relocated. And so that the prosecutors couldn't investigate these things. His son, for instance, even though he was invited by the prosecutor, actually was asked by police to bring him to justice. For 2 months, he did not appear before a court, and after everything was arranged and a suitable prosecutor was appointed, he went there. And also the files about the ministers, 3 ministers that were caught when receiving bribes from an Iranian national, these files were, I think they were 27 dossiers initially, but then they were delayed by the justice minister, so they couldn't arrive from one block ahead of the parliament is just 100 meters. For 2 months they couldn't arrive at the parliament, but when it is a file about the opposition leaders, in 12 hours these files normally reach the parliament. But for these ministers, these 27 files couldn't arrive, and when they arrived, 14 of the files were lost. So, so they've been diluting the issue. It's crystal clear. It's happening in front of our eyes. We see what's happening.
Thank you. Graham?
My question relates to Turkey's membership of NATO, given the changes in its foreign policy and its tilt towards Russia model, if you like. How would you see its membership of NATO being impacted by that, and the attitude of the NATO allies?
Okay, thank you. Actually, what Erdogan says, he is a very pragmatic leader, an intelligent, clever leader. So, even though he says these things against the US at the public rallies, behind the closed doors, actually he agrees to everything what they say. And let me give you some concrete examples. He knows that there is this anti-American sentiment in Turkey, especially after the invasion of Iraq and then Afghanistan. Before, American dream was a dream of everyone in Turkey, and the people love this idea of freedoms, going there and having these opportunities and so on. But after this Bush experimentation, unfortunately, according to Pew polls, I think only 9% of Turkish society look favorable to the US, and he knows this very well. Erdogan is a quantitative guy, so every month he has 4 or 5 different polls, surveys in front of him. So he uses this anti-American, anti-Jewish, even anti-Semitic sentiments in Turkey at the public rallies. But we have American Incirlik base, it's been there, and it is rumored that they also have some nuclear weapons, whatever, but I don't know about this, but what I know is that these bases have been used by Americans to bomb Iraq in 1991 and 2003. So he has never attempted to remove them. I mean, I'm not saying that he should do it, I'm not an Islamist, but this is what he has been saying all the day. And in addition, now Turkey is allowing Americans to build a second base in Malatya, in eastern Anatolia, a missile shield that would also protect Israel. So at a rhetorical level, he keeps talking about these issues, but his son actually, he has 6 ships is in this business, and his son's ships actually are carrying Israeli goods as well. So the rhetoric is something else, but when it comes to action, I don't think that he can take Turkey apart from NATO. I mean, he is saying that he will buy these Chinese missiles and so on. I think he uses it as a bargaining chip and so on. Especially nowadays, he won't do it. And I was in Washington, D.C. last week, and I met with some experts on Turkey, and they were saying that we, as far as we could see, we expect 3 things from Erdogan. Now he's cornered. He has to make some concessions for a solution to the Kurdish problem, and especially a Kurdish autonomous region, a solution to the Cyprus issue, and a betterment of the relations with Israel. As long as he serves all these 3 things, we don't actually care about human rights. Yes, we will make some declarations, but don't expect any sanctions from the Obama administration. So that's the situation. Is very pragmatic, and his chief advisor, Yilmaz, who says Obama is only half leader, he made a declaration last week saying that we will jettison our relations with the European Union, but we will make our relations with US stronger. Why? Because US is more concerned on security and stability in the region.
Has seen the Middle East going through turbulence, and the only state in that region, especially when we see the situation in Syria and currently Egypt. Talking about democracy is something that we all dream to have and dream to see going in the Middle East, but always the fundamentals of democracy being institutions. You know, all what has been said now, the institutions in Turkey are not as strong as would be to a transition. So my concern is now, given the situation in the Middle East and lack of strong institution, and one was mentioned by Ian about the judiciary system and others that failing the, supporting or standing with the current regime, wouldn't that be a source of destabilization of Turkey, which is similar to what happened in Egypt? Because the only strong institution in Egypt was the army. And similarly, in all both of your references, was the army in Turkey. So what sort of other options are there that we can talk about democracy, but the transition being forgotten? And I think it is sensitive in terms of the region. Thank you.
Well, I'll let Ihsan give us some of the details in a minute, but just briefly to put it into context, we had the interchange between Irfan and Ihsan a minute ago about to what extent Erdogan's ideology has shifted, and in one sense he was never quite the democrat that he was presented, even though his party was definitely post-Islamist and contributed to the building of democratic institutions, but nor is he as Islamist as his rhetoric currently suggests. He knows that domestically the economy is the most important thing for his political stability. He knows that internationally there are very hard-line, pragmatic, realpolitik, geostrategic interests that he has to deliver on, so people judge him by his actions, not by his words. But what he is doing at the moment, which is very dangerous, is running down his capital. Turkey's made all these advances in building up democratic institutions, and they are being run down, not at a point yet where the game is over and things are disastrous, but it's a risky thing to be doing when somebody seems to be doing it primarily for personal ambition and personal interests. And that's why I think the international community is so harsh on Erdogan at the moment, and why history may well judge him very harshly. But I think Turkey will get through this because the changes, the growth of the middle class over the last decade, particularly the growth in education, and even the consolidation of institutions, mean that these current, tinkering is too mild a word, this current sort of vandalism of institutions, I don't think is enough to completely undermine them.
Yeah, I fully agree. It's a complicated situation, but thanks to our military generals, unfortunately, democracy in Turkey has not been consolidated. So Turkish voters did not have any chance to punish their leaders, democratic elected leaders. So every 10 years, they, by resorting to these coups, they also victimize these politicians, and they never suffered their mistakes. And Erdogan, for instance, increased his votes in 2007. Why? Because the military generals intervened with the presidential elections, and they said that a headscarved lady could not be wife of president. So a person with a headscarf wife cannot be elected as president and so on. So he increased his vote. So institutions in Turkey are not very formidable. They are not very robust, but they are not like the Middle Eastern ones either. So we have a long history of democracy. For instance, when we listen to these white trap conversations of ministers and so on, the interior minister asks the police officer, the chief of police in Istanbul, to go to a journalist's home and just break his door with a sledgehammer and detain him and so on. But this police officer did not obey him. He didn't do it. We learned this afterwards. So a month ago he said this, but they did not obey him. And several prosecutors...
Okay, thank you. I think we got one more question in the back here, and then we will call the panel to an end unless they have concluding statements.
Thank you. I just have a few questions and points in regards to
Can we make one question?
Mr. Yilmaz's speech.
Time for one question.
Okay, sure. Then I'd like to point out that you spoke of the reform package of Erdogan, or his process of reforming certain establishments like the military's role in government, and you spoke of it as though it was a fear of him or his party to be debunked or to be left out of the political scheme or to be thrown out. But was this not a case for the people of Turkey, a fear for the people of Turkey because they understand the repercussions of a coup and its travel back into history 50 years?
Okay, thank you. That's a question?
Yes, that's a question. Can I just point out a few more points?
You can answer that question. You had one question. Were
Points.
Turkish people afraid of the consequences of the coup?
Okay, all right. I guess I can answer that.
We'll have an answer. Thank you.
Of course, I never said that coup is something good, but and I think I was clear enough to say that military generals have been stupid enough to do coups, and it was against the wishes of the people and so on. But what I'm saying is that Erdogan's fear evaporated so that he could go his own way of authoritarianism without any de facto checks and balances from the military. I'm not saying that this is legitimate, but this was a fact in Turkey that if you wanted to establish an authoritarian regime in Turkey, Islamist, whatever, military would simply stop you. This is what they did to Erbakan in the past. I'm not saying that this is legitimate, but we need to make factual observations. So when the military generals were put behind the bars, his second fear of a military coup evaporated. Yes, also people's fear was evaporated, but people's concern was not about establishing an authoritarian regime. The concern was about their freedoms. But Erdogan issue is different here, because when we look at his acts, we see that he is not concerned about democracy, freedoms, European Union. He is concerned about banning Twitter and banning YouTube. So they have different. The aim is there, but intentions are different.
Thank you. Greg, do you have a final comment?
Sure, let me just conclude by saying, Ihsan asked whether I'm optimistic. I do think that unless things get very much worse, we should remain optimistic about Turkey. I think that what is currently happening threatens Turkish democracy, and that we should be very concerned about that. But it also has the potential to contribute to the maturation and growth of Turkish democracy. Turkey is a wonderful, beautiful country, but it's also deeply troubled. It's deeply neurotic. Paranoia is a common sentiment for good reasons, given the history of Turkey, as with Russia. And there are issues unresolved in Turkish democracy to this day. And these current developments, although they're troubling, have the potential of working out the maturation of the public's thinking about democracy and understanding the importance of institutions like the judiciary, respecting the freedom of speech and so on. And I think we're seeing the emergence of a crossing of lines between so-called Islamic and secular elements in a way that's very healthy. So we should look at the complexity of this and see both some promising developments as well as some concerning developments.
Well, thank you very much, panel. Join me in thanking them, please.